What is going on, Hoops fans? We are back at it with another video, and I am really excited to put this one out as the NBA offseason is finally complete. It's been complete now for about a week or so, and we have seen so much turnover. And I can't remember ever since I've been watching this sport where so many top-tier players switch teams. Yes, of course, you always have the big names in free agency, but this year, I mean, you're talking about the top 10 players in the league all switching teams. Anthony Davis, obviously Kawhi Leonard, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Russell Westbrook, Paul George, so many other big names, Kemba Walker, and the list just goes on and on and on. And what a free agency period this was. And in this video, we're going to get into all that, and also what I think about the competition in this league going forward, and how healthy I think the NBA is now. The problem I've always had with the NBA, even since I've been watching it as a kid, has been that there's never parity. In the early to mid-'90s, you had Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. Yes, there were always teams that you thought maybe could knock them off, my Knicks included, but they never could get it done. And you always knew the Bulls were the heavy favorites. Then you had the Lakers with Phil Jackson, with, Shaq and Kobe, of course, as they dominated for a bit. Then the Spurs came into play with Popovich and Duncan. Then the super team started with the Celtics, with Garnett, with everybody else. Of course, that Lakers team tried it as well with Malone and Peyton. That didn't really work out so much. But the Celtics ended up winning a crown. Then LeBron copied that model, pairing up with Bosh to join, obviously, Dwayne Wade in Miami. They ended up winning a few titles. And then the Warriors copied that model with Kevin Durant. So, and then you can even say the Cavs did it with Kevin Love and LeBron James pairing up with Kyrie Irving. So, I mean, that has just been the way the league has been forever. You always have one or two teams that you know are the heavy favorites to win a title. And this year there are favorites. But I think there's a lot of parity. And I think there's 10, maybe 12 teams that can win a championship, just like the NFL. And it is going to be a treat to watch this year. Some of the offseason moves, the way that the NBA shook out, it is unbelievable stuff. It is the wild, wild west. The West definitely has the majority of the talent in the league, as they've had for quite some time, which is why LeBron, for most of his career, stayed in the Eastern Conference. But when you look at the West, you could argue outside of Antetokounmpo, they have 9 out of the top 10 players in the league, which is crazy. But there are no super teams. Most of these teams now have 2 superstars, not 3, which I really, really like. I like the balance in the Western Conference. And the Eastern Conference has a couple of top-tier teams at the top. The rest is kind of a crapshoot. And as a Knicks fan, I'm kind of encouraged by that, because if the Knicks get good in a few years with this young talent they brought in, they could be at the top in no time. But let's jump right into it. We're going to start with the Brooklyn Nets. Now, the Brooklyn Nets this offseason, nobody saw this coming a few months ago leading up into free agency. Everybody thought Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving were headed to the Knicks with the cap space they created. Now, the Knicks, of course, missed out. They said they didn't offer Durant a contract. We'll never know. But Kyrie Irving went on with the Nets, and then Kevin Durant followed. Expect the Nets, not this year, but the following year, to be competing for an NBA championship. They also brought in the former defensive player DeAndre Jordan. Of course, I say not this year, because Kevin Durant will not play this year with the injury that he sustained. But the Nets, I expect to be back in the playoffs, probably as a 4 or 5 seed, as they look to continue to build off of last season's success with that young nucleus. The next team we're going to speak on is the Toronto Raptors, the defending champions. Now, Toronto, don't get me wrong, still has a decent core. Right? They still have Gasol. They still have Siakam. They still have Van Vliet. They have some nice young players on that team. Kyle Lowry. Obviously not young, but still a good player. They lost, however, Kawhi Leonard. And I don't feel bad for Toronto, because everybody knows Toronto was taking a gamble, and the gamble paid off. They won a championship, but everybody knows when they acquired him, he was probably going to leave, and that's exactly what he did. So I expect the Raptors, obviously, to take a big step back, as they lost arguably the best player on the planet. I still think they'll make the playoffs, probably as a 6 seed. But don't expect the Raptors to be competing for any titles anytime soon after the loss of Kawhi Leonard. That's now going to bring us to the Philadelphia 76ers. The Sixers, of course, last year tried to compete with a championship with the young nucleus they already had in place with Embiid and Simmons. They then went out and acquired 2 bona fide superstars in Tobias Harris and, of course, Jimmy Butler. Well, they're going to bring Tobias Harris back on a max contract. They let Jimmy Butler walk, however, as they traded him away to the Miami Heat. So they take a step back there, but then they went out and they signed Al Horford. Al Horford, I don't love the contract. He's going to be 37 at the end of it, but he still is a very good player. He's a good glue piece. He's a former All-Star, and he's certainly going to help out that front court there in Philadelphia. He'll help them stretch the floor as well. I like that pickup. I think the Sixers are one of the 2 favorites to come out of the Eastern Conference next year. And they definitely have a good core 4 there in Horford, Tobias Harris, Embiid, and Simmons. Simmons needs to work on that jump shot, though. That now brings us to the Boston Celtics. The Celtics, to me, have the second best coach in the NBA in Brad Stevens. What he's been able to do with that team has been miraculous over the last 2 years. Kyrie Irving, of course, is now gone, but they replaced him with KEMBA Walker. KEMBA Walker may very well fit that system better, and he will not be the locker room cancer that Kyrie Irving was as they signed him to a max deal. Of course, I mentioned they lost Al Horford. Now they replace him with a younger player in Enes Kanter. Now, we all know as Knicks fans that Enes Kanter doesn't play defense, but he is one of the best rebounders in the league. He could get you some points. He's a double-double machine, and if anybody could get some defense out of him, it would be Brad Stevens. You look at some of the players that have come out of Boston, Marcus Smart, they play defense for him. So we'll have to see if they could get some defense out of Enes Kanter. But nonetheless, solid pickup for the Celtics as I expect Kanter to start at the center spot. And I actually have them pegged as the 3rd best team going into the year in the Eastern Conference. That now brings us to the favorite, the team that won 62 games last year in the Milwaukee Bucks, and the team that has the best player by far, in my opinion, especially with Durant out in the Eastern Conference. That is, of course, Antetokounmpo, and he, of course, plays for the Milwaukee Bucks. The Bucks last year won 62 games before failing to win an NBA championship. They bring back Chris Middleton, who was a free agent. They sign him on a max deal. A lot of people question that move, but this guy's one of the best shooters in the league, a former All-Star, and part of that core there. So they brought him back. They suffered a loss, though, in Malcolm Brogdon, who went over to the rival Indiana Pacers, who had an historical year last year, and we'll get into that in a minute when we get to Indiana. But the Bucks lose him. They bring in Robin Lopez to help a little bit there in the front court. But I still think the Bucks are the cream of the crop in the Eastern Conference. That brings us to the Orlando Magic. Orlando was a surprise playoff team last year in the East as they got an 8 seed. They won 1 game against the Bucks in the first round, and they have a nice young core there in Aaron Gordon and Nikola Vucevic. They brought back Vucevic on a big contract there, the standout center, who they, of course, drafted and has been a big piece of that Magic team. They also brought in Al-Farouq Aminu. I don't think the Magic are going to improve much. They probably stay right around where they are, a fringe playoff team that could maybe just miss the playoffs or just make it. 7 or 8 seed or a team that just misses the playoffs. That's what I expect from the Magic. They didn't really improve their team. They kind of just maintained it. Now, of course, the younger players can get better, Aaron Gordon. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Indiana Pacers, to me, are a sneaky, sneaky basketball team. This is a team that maybe not a lot of people are talking about. I think can win the Eastern Conference. I'm not going to pick it, but I wouldn't rule it out. They get back Victor Oladipo, who, of course, got hurt last year, who will be a big part of this team. He has really progressed since leaving the aforementioned Orlando Magic, and he's one of the best players on the planet. Great player there. They bring in Malcolm Brogdon, who, of course, said, formerly of the Milwaukee Bucks, was only the 8th player in the history of basketball last year to have a season in which he recorded a 40% three-point percentage, a 50% field goal percentage, and a 90% free throw percentage in the same year. Brogdon is a great pickup for this team to pair with the young core of Miles Turner, Oladipo, and, of course, Sabonis. So I really like this Pacers team going into next year. Right now I have pegged at 4th, but they are trending upwards. And then finally, that brings me to my New York Knicks. Now, the New York Knicks last year finished with the worst record on the planet with 17 wins. They definitely improved their team. They, of course, wanted the big fish in Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. Didn't work out, but they brought in some guys on cost-effective deals who are young and some veterans who will help the young players mature. I really like what the Knicks did, and I could see them competing for that 8 seed. If a team like the Magic, say, fall off a bit, maybe the Knicks squeeze into the playoffs with the additions that they brought in. The Julius Randle, who I think is an underrated player, averaged 21 points, 9 rebounds last year. They also brought in Wayne Ellington, a nice player off the bench. I mean, you go down the list. They brought in a lot of nice players. Marcus Morris, a very nice player. Elfrid Payton, a very nice player. Bullock was a nice pickup. So I really like some of the things that the Knicks did this offseason as they filled out their roster. They, of course, also had the 3rd pick and brought in R.J. Barrett, who looked great in those last 2 or 3 games of Summer League. So I'm looking forward to seeing him progress in his NBA career and look for the Knicks maybe to compete at the back end of that Eastern Conference. That will now bring us to the wild, wild West. And the West is stacked. It is loaded. both of teams in the present and the future. And we're going to get into all that. The Phoenix Suns, I'm not even going to talk about, have a bright future. But we will start with the LA Lakers. And the first thing the Lakers did this offseason was make a coaching change. They brought in Frank Vogel, he's an established head coach in this league who will probably help out that Lakers roster. They then went out and traded for one of the best players on the planet in Anthony Davis to pair him with LeBron James. Arguably 2 of the top 5 players in the league now play for the LA Lakers. Davis has not had a lot of postseason success, but I would argue it's because he hasn't had any surrounding talent. Well, now he's got it in LA. They also brought in some nice pieces. DeMarcus Cousins on a very cheap contract as he continues to chase rings, coming off his second injury in 2 years. But if he can remain healthy, pairing him up with his old teammate in Anthony Davis and LeBron James, that would be a formidable opponent. They also brought in a nice piece there, the 3-and-D three-point specialist in Danny Green, who brings some championship experience, along with Avery Bradley, who's an established veteran. That'll now bring us to the LA Clippers. And the LA Clippers, what an offseason this team had. The Clippers had a very nice young nucleus. They made the playoffs last year. And now they go out and they trade some of that nucleus. They trade some of their future first-round picks. But by doing so, they bring in some of the best players the league has to offer. They brought in Kawhi Leonard, last year's NBA Finals MVP, an unbelievable talent. Along with him, they bring in Paul George, who I believe came in third for MVP vote, coming off a career year in which he averaged 28 points, 7 rebounds. They will form a dynamic duo for the Clippers, and LA is going to be on fire this year in the NBA between the Lakers and the Clippers. They also re-signed Zubac, along with re-signing Patrick Beverley. They brought in Maurice Harkless, and they bring back Montrezl Harrell and sweet Lou Williams. And Lou Williams should thrive with the surrounding talent there for the Clippers. Clippers are dangerous this year. That now brings us to the Golden State Warriors. I like what the Golden State Warriors did considering their situation. The Warriors, of course, over the last few years have had a four-headed monster. The core four, Draymond Green, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant. They now have lost for next year 2 of that core four. They, of course, signed Klay Thompson to a max deal, but Klay Thompson suffered an ACL injury, and he will probably miss, if not all, the majority of next season, and they lose Kevin Durant to free agency, who will be out this year with an Achilles injury. Now, this year is an opportunity, in my opinion, for Steph Curry and Steve Kerr to really help their legacies, and I'm not counting this team out because they went out there and brought in D'Angelo Russell, who is still young, emerging. He's coming off a career year in which he averaged 21 points and 7 assists. You now bring him into Golden State with Steve Kerr's mind, with Steph Curry, with Draymond Green. Don't count the Warriors out. This team is still in contention in the Western Conference. Next up is the Denver Nuggets. Denver, what a year they had last year. And basically they didn't add much. They kept their core. They signed Jamal Murray to an extension in which I believe it was a max deal. Of course, Millsap is back. Harris is back. Jokic, arguably the best center in the league. One of the best passing big men the league's ever had to offer. Grant, they drafted Bol. But their most important acquisition, in my opinion, was last year's first-round draft pick, Michael Porter Jr. Michael Porter last year could have went first overall had it not been for the late injuries that came out, and he missed all of last season. But because of those reports that came out, Porter Jr. fell all the way to the mid-teens, and Denver was able to snatch him up. Now, if he can be healthy, he could be a huge piece to add to this already great Denver team to help them contend in the Western Conference. The Portland Trailblazers. We'll get to them now. Portland, of course, when you think of Portland, you think of that dynamic backcourt with Damian Lillard and, of course, C.J. McCollum. The Blazers took that backcourt all the way to the Western Conference Finals this year before getting swept 4-0 against the Golden State Warriors. The Blazers went out, they made a trade, and they brought in one of the best shot blockers in the league in Hassan Whiteside. So a very nice pickup there to help out that front court to pair with the dynamic backcourt, as the Blazers, in my opinion, improved a bit this offseason as well. And then that brings us to the Utah Jazz, who I think improved big time. And this was a team that already made the playoffs last year. I believe they were a 5 seed in the Western Conference. You know what they did? They went out, they brought in one of the best point guards in the league in Mike Conley, an established veteran. Now, I don't love the contract, but this guy is a great defender. He's coming off a great year in which he averaged 21 points and 7 assists. You pair him with the guys they already had on the roster, Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, Defensive Player of the Year, and you bring in Bogdanovich, who came off a career year in Indiana. Look for Utah. They are sneaky. They are sneaky good. I love their two-way talent on that team. Look for Utah to have a chance to compete to win an NBA championship. I mean, you look at all these teams, it is crazy. The Houston Rockets are up next. And the Houston Rockets, all they did was bring in one of the best players on the planet. Now, the fit, we don't know how it's going to work. But they were able to bring in Russell Westbrook as OKC continues to rebuild. And I actually like what OKC did. They got a ton of draft picks for these players, and they're rebuilding their roster the right way. They were rebuilt through the draft because, quite frankly, they were not going to win any NBA championships, especially after they traded away Paul George. But as far as the Rockets go, you have James Harden. You now pair him up with his old teammate. They, of course, were both drafted from OKC, who has now lost all those players. OKC drafted Durant, Harden, and Westbrook. They're all gone. And Ibaka. And they're all gone. But as far as the Rockets goes, I don't know how it's going to fit because they're both ball-dominant players. Of course, they're both Mr. Triple-Double. Westbrook's averaged three over the last 3 years. That's been his average, is a triple-double. They both have won MVP awards. So a lot of talent there in Houston. If they can get it to gel, Houston can compete. That's 7 teams we've already mentioned in the West that can compete for an NBA championship. The NBA is in unbelievable shape. And then the last 2 teams I want to mention are teams that I think not so much this year, but I love the way they're shaping their rosters for the foreseeable future. And we're going to start with the Dallas Mavericks. The Dallas Mavericks last year drafted Luka Doncic, who won Rookie of the Year. Great talent. Also, midseason they acquired Kristaps Porzingis from my New York Knicks. Porzingis, we all know when healthy, is called the unicorn for a reason. He is a special talent. Matter of fact, the first half of the season 2 years ago, you could argue he was in the top 3 or 4 for the MVP race. That's how good he was playing for the Knicks before he went down with that injury. He now comes back to full strength as they have signed him to a max deal. If Porzingis could stay healthy, along with Luka Doncic, they also brought in Seth Curry, who should help out that backcourt as well, the brother of Steph, very good shooter. Look for the Mavericks to maybe compete for an 8 seed, but in the future, this team could be dangerous if they could add one more piece because Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis, the future for both those players, if they remain healthy, is very bright. And now that brings us finally to the New Orleans Pelicans, and I actually love what this team did. Anthony Davis was leaving no matter what. So what do? They go out there, they get a plethora of picks and a lot of young talent from the LA Lakers and Josh Hart, Lonzo Ball, and Brandon Ingram. One of the picks they acquired was the 4th overall selection in this year's draft, as well as 2 future firsts. They then take that 4th overall selection, swap it, they trade down, they get the 8th, the 17th, the 35th pick to fill in more holes for that roster. And of course, they had the number 1 pick as they got lucky in the lottery, and they brought in Zion Williamson. They still have Drew Holiday on the roster, and Zion will be the guy they build this team around, and he is going to be a supreme talent in this league. So if you're a Pelicans fan, in the future, you've got to be ecstatic because the future is bright for the Pelicans. But that is how NBA free agency broke down for me and the offseason as a whole. The league as a whole is as healthy as it's ever been. And if you're a Hoops fan, you got to be excited going into next year. It is going to be a treat to watch this all play out. All the storylines you have in the Western Conference, whether it be LeBron and the Lakers, the Rockets with their 2 triple-double machines, the Jazz with the acquisitions they made, the Clippers. I mean, the league is stacked, and there are so many storylines to go around, and it is going to be so much fun next year. But I'd like to get your guys' thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of the offseason? What do you think of the state of the NBA? And who do you think are the favorites to take home the crown? As always, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.